Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks, thank you for joining us for Beyond the Podium once again. You're no stranger to running in this contest. You obviously have won the last two. Why do you think that this race now is being deemed a toss-up? Just within recently, what's happening right now? Because it was leaning Republican just a short time ago.
Well, personally, I think, to me, this is always going to be a close race. It's a swing district, and I think rating agencies and pollsters overrated it to begin with, so now they're actually coming back to the center, which is where it should be. It's a swing district. It's always been a swing district. It was a Democrat district. We did win the last two contests, as you know, the first one by 6 votes, larger margin the second one, but we're now back into a presidential year cycle. And I think the presidential races always change the dynamics of any particular race. And also in 2022, we had a very popular governor who was on the ballot. So to me, the race is really where it should have always been. It's a swing district. It's a very competitive district, very tough district. And so my strategy has not changed throughout all of this. We're going to continue to be out there, to be in the district, to meet with people, to do all the things we've done, and continue to do our official congressional duties at the same time. And then, we'll have a determination on November 5th on whether this seat stays with the incumbent or if it goes with a new individual.
Regardless of what people think about the closeness of the race, the priorities haven't seemed to change, and the top of the list remains the economy. We are seeing very strong economic growth in the country, and it seems that the message from voters is that they're not feeling it. Why is it not getting down to the average Iowan in your district?
Well, because the average person is seeing high prices in the grocery store, high prices at the gas pump, and high prescription drug prices. So on metrics for what individuals face on a day-to-day basis, when you're working poor, when you're a family, when you're trying to put kids through school, you're a senior citizen on a fixed income, and you're looking at high prices. Although the official inflation number may be down from 9% as it was in 2022, caused by the policies of the Biden-Harris administration, people see that prices have not come down. And also, despite the official number being in the 3s, it has gone down to 3.2, up to 3.5, so hovering in the 3s, it's still cumulative year over year. So when you have a cumulative inflation year after year, when it was in 2020, December of 2020, it was under 2, around 1.6%, people are feeling the pinch of inflation and they're hurting. They're struggling, and they don't see the policies of this administration as helping them, and in fact have made things worse. Then you add on top of that, what's the next biggest expense for individuals after food and gasoline? And it's either rent or housing. And so rental prices are up. Interest rates to buy a house are the highest they've been in decades. Now, granted, I'm old enough to have seen interest rates at higher than 6 to 8%. But most individuals, especially young individuals, they have not encountered interest rates at this level. So if you're trying to borrow to purchase a home or to start a home, if you're trying to borrow to start a small business or buy a car or buy a used car, then you're seeing interest rates. And when you add the interest rate to the price of what you're paying, it's out of the range that most people can afford. So they're looking at high interest rates. They're looking at high prices at the grocery store, at the gas pump, prescription drug prices, but all along, what people are mostly spending money on is higher than it was, and they're not better off than they were 4 years ago.
One thing that I've heard from a lot of people, and this is something that Democrats like to talk about, is that we went through a terrible financial crisis because of the pandemic, and we saw corporations still make record profits. We went through very high inflation, which really hurt consumers, but we still saw corporations turning in record high profits. If these things are, can we really attribute inflation to policy? Because it sounds like a lot of it went to profits.
Well, I would say all you have to do is listen to Milton Friedman. So Milton Friedman says inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. At the end of 2020, we were already had a vaccine that was out. Vaccines were being distributed to individuals. Iowa had already opened up its economy. Many of the restrictions were being relaxed. So we were already seeing that, certainly in Iowa, which was considered to be one of the most resilient economies through the pandemic, its economic position was already very secure. We were already coming out of the pandemic. We were already well on the way out of the pandemic. And you had a government in March of 2021 that spent $1.9 trillion on COVID relief that was unnecessary at a time when there already were some supply chain issues because the world had, shuttered businesses or had businesses go onto a pause. So you had too much money chasing too few goods, spurred by a government that was continuing to put out money when money had already been put out for COVID relief. So absolutely, the policies of the Biden administration led to inflation, led to increased inflation. Again, remember, it was below 2% in December of 2020. By May of 2021, it was already around 5.6%. So you'd already seen a massive increase in inflation in that short amount of time. What was the difference? 1.9 trillion COVID spending package, and then followed by 2 more large spending packages in addition to our normal annual government spending package, which is around 4 trillion.
Another thing we hear a lot about is immigration right now. There was a bill in Congress that was championed by a Republican in the Senate. It had bipartisan co-sponsors. It appeared to be ready to go through at least the Senate. I can't speak about the House.
Let me correct you right now.
Sure.
There was no bill in Congress. The bill in Congress passed in Congress, and that was H.R. 2. H.R. 2 was a bill that passed in Congress that had both border security and immigration reform.
Passed in the House.
There was no passed in Congress,
Right.
Passed in the House. There was no other bill in the House.
In the Senate, though, is what I'm talking about, because that one had bipartisan support, and then suddenly President Trump spoke out against it, and even people who helped negotiate that bill all of a sudden opposed it. If we continue down this road, where we did have the House pass a bill, Republicans supported it, Democrats did not, on a partisan basis, Republicans currently control the House, they don't control the Senate, they don't control the White House. How is that effectively legislating? Because you do have to work with the other side, and it's very possible that Democrats may still have control of the White House or may have control of the House. They may have some control come 2025. Doesn't that require bipartisan give?
I already have legislation for bipartisan legislation on immigration and on legal immigration. And so President Obama had supermajorities in both houses, talked about immigration in his campaign, did nothing on immigration when he had supermajorities for 2 years. And it wasn't until his last 2 years of his presidency that he then started talking about immigration because he was getting pushback from those who he promised he would do something on this issue. So it is both a Republican and a Democrat problem.
Absolutely.
I voted for a House bill. The Senate could have picked up that House bill. They could have amended the House bill. They did nothing. They sat on it. They didn't do anything on immigration until it became a problem for Democrats. A problem for Democrats because of their policies on sanctuary cities, their policies on opening a border in January of 2021, letting untold millions of people come in illegally, about 1.9 million known gotaways, people on the terror watch list, and fentanyl as well as other illegal drugs come into the country. Only when it was a problem for Democrats did they speak about doing something about immigration. So I'm going to push back on that a little bit. This is a fault of the Biden-Harris administration. They continue on that same fault. This is not the Republicans responsibly passed an immigration bill, and I have several bills on legal immigration that are bipartisan that I have been trying to get across, both through a Democrat majority House as well as a Republican majority House.
I don't think there's any question both parties have dropped the ball. We haven't had comprehensive immigration reform in, I believe, 40 years almost. This is something that administrations of both parties have tried to get through Congress, or members of leadership in Congress has tried to get through. But again, even that more than 40 years ago was bipartisan. Doesn't that require some give? Because I don't see, and honestly, I don't see either side giving, excuse me, with the exception of that bill that did seem to get some bipartisan support, at least in the Senate.
I would say that, again, the House has passed a bill. The Senate could have picked up the bill that the House passed, but declined to do so. Why didn't they pick up a House bill in 2023? Why didn't they pick up the House bill in 2024? We had border security and we had immigration reforms. We have other aspects of immigration reform. So I think that and you have had Democrat majorities, super majorities, that could have passed things on immigration. This is, as to your point, I agree, it is not a new issue. It is not a new issue. We want to have a fence with a big gate. We want legal immigration reform. Legal. What we got was we're going to have illegal immigrants come into our country, process them, and say we have control over a southern border. It was Jay Johnson, Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, who said more than 1,000 illegal immigrants coming across our border is a crisis. There's vastly more than that now. But again, the Democrats did not consider this a crisis until Democrat mayors and Democrat governors started crying foul on the amount of money it was costing them, not having housing, the amount of social benefits it was costing, and the amount it was costing their cities. It was not until they had pushback from their own party that they decided we might want to do something on immigration. So it is a top issue for them. The border is a top issue. So now all of a sudden they want to address a problem they in fact created on the past 4 years.
Well, there's no question that the biggest way to get politicians to take action is to make it a problem for their voters. And obviously that is a key issue on both sides of the aisle right now.
When Republicans had a majority in 2023, we actually did what we are supposed to do, and that is to put forth legislation to address the issue. So we put forth legislation to address the issue. We recognized it was an issue. We were not in the majority in 21 and 22. But in 23, we passed a bill. The Senate should have taken up that bill, and they declined to do so until it became a political issue for the Democrat Party.
One other key issue we're hearing a lot of is abortion. We have a 6-week ban on abortion here with exceptions. We've seen a lot of states do various things from severe restrictions, some restrictions, expanded access even. What role does the federal government play in this now? Does the federal government need to step in and enact some type of restriction? Do they need to step in and lay out clearly what those exceptions mean so that doctors aren't left trying to decide what they can and can't do?
Well, I'm pro-life with exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I'm going to push back a little bit on your comment that doctors know what they do. Doctors know what the law says. I'm a doctor.
Right, but
some
of these laws that have passed.
When the law says that there are exceptions for the life of the mother, so I think you're inferring the case in Georgia, which is not accurate. This is malpractice in this case. This case will end up going through that situation. It wasn't because there was questions about what the law in Georgia said. It was because my understanding and talking with other doctors, an individual showed up, had retained fetal contents, whether it's from a miscarriage or whether it was from a chemical abortion, and was not given care when they should have been given care. That will be a malpractice suit.
I wasn't speaking specifically about that, but just in general, because
the Dobbs decision turned that back to the states.
But in many of these states,
some states haven't. I think the thing is, who's extreme on abortion? We have 8 states now that have abortion up until the time of birth. The House, in fact, passed a bill under Democrat leadership that every single Democrat except one voted for, which was abortion up until the time of birth. That's what the House passed. The Senate declined to pass it, and Vice President Harris said that it was unfortunate that the Senate declined to pass that bill. You have 8 states now that have abortion up until the time of birth, and in fact, the vice president candidate on the Democrat side on the presidential ticket not only passed that into law and signed it into Minnesota, but also that you couldn't resuscitate a baby it was born alive after surviving an abortion. That's where we are. But the Dobbs decision has returned that back to the states.
In many of these states, though, they had trigger laws, and these trigger laws were not very well written. Even many of the people who support the restrictions say it needs to be addressed. Are you at least confident, and I know this isn't in your realm, are you at least confident that the law now in place here in Iowa will not see those issues here?
I think the law is very clear with its exceptions, rape, incest, and life of the mother within our state. And on the federal level, there is not a bill or a law, and President Trump has said that he would not put forward or sign one.
So
that
you don't
would restrict abortion.
Do you think there should be any federal restrictions on abortion?
I think right now it is up to the states. That's what the Dobbs decision has done. But I would say that the majority of Americans do not agree with abortion up until the time of birth. They also do not agree with not helping an infant who has survived a botched abortion. So I think when you look at the American public, you know, the vast majority of the American public is not for abortion up until the time of birth. But those are those states' decisions.
We have a lot of issues around the world that we are involved in. Congress doesn't seem to get a lot of say in this anymore. And this goes back all the way back to the AUMF that led us into the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Is this something that Congress needs to address? I mean, right now we're basically coming to Congress to pay for this, and that's become an issue, both in the case of Ukraine and Israel, as well as our allies in the Southeast. Is this something that Congress needs to step in more? And are you still supportive of the levels of funding that we're giving to countries like Israel and Ukraine?
So I think that absolutely Congress needs to reassert itself as a co-equal branch of government, not just being the payer, if you will, or the appropriator of what it is that the administration, regardless of whether that's a Republican or a Democrat administration. And I've said this when I've run and when I've campaigned, and that is Congress has a role in these types of decisions. Now, granted, in these two conflicts, we do not have boots on the ground, so we're not asking to make a declaration of war, nor are we asking for American troops to be inserted into that conflict, but certainly we are assisting in other ways. The House Republicans have asked the Biden-Harris administration, especially when it comes to Ukraine, for metrics of success. So we have quite a number of veterans in our conference. I'm also part of a bipartisan military veteran group called Four Country Caucus. And our members in our caucus are concerned about unending funding without having metrics of success and outcomes. So, you know, what are we anticipating doing? What's going to happen? You know, what's our metric? We're not going to continue funding year after year after year. There has to be some outcome measures to determine what the funding should be. We also hamstringed Ukraine early on and would not allow any weapons that had been purchased from the United States to be used to go across the Russian border. So Russia could amass troops at the border and fire into Ukraine, but Ukraine couldn't conduct themselves in a likewise manner. So that those actions of the United States prolonged the war. And let me also say that these are wars that internationally occur, I think, because of weakness of the Biden-Harris administration. From the beginning, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, opening up the border, trying to get back into JCPOA or the Iran nuclear agreement, appeasing the mullahs and Khomeini in Iran, the disastrous, incompetent pullout from Afghanistan, then I can tell you as a military veteran, it was unconscionable what we did in Iran and leaving Iran. Afghanistan, excuse me. And how much that emboldened both Russia, Iran, and China, the Chinese Communist Party. So we have a situation in the world where we have weakness that breeds aggression, and we have certainly seen that. Even when Russia was amassing troops at the Ukrainian border, over 100,000 troops were in the news reports, we didn't do anything. When we finally put on sanctions, it was putting on sanctions late, and this was after President Biden had made the poor comment that a little incursion was okay. I'm not sure if that's an exact quote, but in essence of that, which if you're an aggressive individual like Putin, you would see that as a green light to invade. So the sanctions were put on too slowly. We were too slow to respond. We were also doing things that could be interpreted as weakness in the United States and that we were not going to defend our allies and our friends. On October 6th, I was with Senator Ernst. We were in Saudi Arabia where we were due to go to Israel. And at that time, it was to promote the Abraham Accords and the economic modernization within the Middle East, which for the first time was actually leading to peace. As we know, the Palestinians, Yasser Arafat, had declined a two-state solution. He had declined and refused after all his conditions had been met. We know that Israel had pulled out of Gaza in 2005 and left it to Gaza to determine and vote for who they wanted as their governing entity. And so when we were meeting there, the Abraham Accords, the economic modernization was seen as the largest steps towards peace. And we know as Saudi Arabia was going to come in to economic modernization, this was something that Iran could not tolerate. And then their proxy Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, as is their proxy Hezbollah, as is their proxy the Houthis, attacked Israel on October 7th.
We have Bob Woodward, I don't think I need to explain to you his credentials, has a new book coming out. And in it, he is describing, at least on 7 separate occasions, that former President Trump has had direct communication with Vladimir Putin during the Biden administration. In his words, he calls it effective shadow presidency. Is that a good idea when it comes to international relations? And are you confident that President Trump will remain tough on Russia when it comes to Ukraine?
Well, first of all, none of those were verified, either by the Biden administration nor by Bob Woodward, anybody else. And also in that book, President Biden is accusing President Obama of having created this crisis and the problems in Ukraine. So I would say that I expect President Trump to do what he has done best, and that is to protect the interests of the United States and to put America's interests first and foremost.
Does that include?
I think that he will be strong. I think he will be willing to take on a Putin authoritarian regime who is intent on, reassembling the Soviet Union. So I will expect a President Trump to defend the United States and to defend its interests.
Would you support any such deal that brings that war to an end, that sees Ukraine ceding land to Russia?
I think it really depends upon what it is that we're talking about. So I'd like to see what the provisions are of such an arrangement. It is very possible that in order to achieve peace, that there may be land that is ceded. But the current situation where Russia is trying to take all of Ukraine, I think is very problematic, and it is against what we agreed to as a country. The United States agreed in 1994 in the Bucharest Agreement that if Ukraine was to give up its nuclear weapons, and at that time was the 3rd largest holder of nuclear weapons in the world, that we would protect and help it defend it, not military protect necessarily, but that we would help defend its sovereignty and independence.
You've been in Congress now for a while. We see the disruption and everything that makes the headlines. We've seen the turmoil within your own party. We've seen a speaker ousted for the first time. We've seen another challenged, but he's kept his seat. Is there any shred of hope that on the big issues facing our country today, whether it's immigration, economy, climate change, all of that, that there can be bipartisan agreement? Because it seems like there's a lot of people who see success in simply obstructing. And I feel like that's not something you agree with. So how do we get back to that? Because that does take both sides, I agree. But we have a split government, and that's something that has been a problem now for, I would argue, decades.
Well, I've been in Congress for 4 years, so I don't know if that's a long time or not.
Lately, it feels that way.
It can feel that way. But I would say, one of the things that was startling to me, having come from state government, where as the chair of the Human Services Committee, I put forth bills that were brought forth by Democrats and put forth bills that were brought forth by Republicans, tried to work with both parties to put forth good health policy. And we really did some great things. In our health policy, one was trying to get passed, and this was bipartisan, that lawful permanent residents that were here didn't have to wait 5 years to get Medicaid for pregnancy because of the low birth weight and prematurity, which was costing a great deal of money to our Medicaid program. And this was a cost savings measure. And we worked with both the House and the Senate working. I passed a bill for oral contraception over the counter in the Senate that had bipartisan support. And so coming to Congress and being told that when you're trying to work on a bill or an amendment, that we're told not to work with Republicans, we're told no Republicans can be on our bills, both parties have to put an end to that. Putting forth legislation in my first 2 years in Congress, big legislation, without involving Republicans, without being able to offer amendments, without going through the regular process. At least Republicans in their 2 years of majority have restored regular order. We go through the subcommittee process, through the committee process. Democrats are allowed to offer amendments. Some of them get approved and voted upon in a favorable manner. Some do not. And then to offer amendments on the floor, we have at least done that part, which is more than was offered to me as an incoming member of Congress in 2021 and 2022. So I would say more work needs to be done. We need to continue to meet with people, and I don't try to ascribe motivations to people. when I'm looking at. I try to look at a policy or a bill and to find out, is it a good policy? Is it a good bill? Does it establish a new federal program? Does it require new funding? And if there is new funding, is it paid for by a way through other funding? That's my overall approach to legislation, but most importantly to craft good legislation. We've got a great bill, the Drug Act, which it happens to be a bipartisan bill. It would lower prescription drug prices right now. It's taking on big interests and big special interests, but we're doing it because it's what's right for the American people. In order to pass savings on to individuals because of the way that the drug supply chain exists between pharmaceutical companies and the pharmacists to eventually deliver and dispense medication. So looking at that middle gray area that is very opaque and trying to get prescription drug prices down. So I'm going to continue to work in the fashion that I have done in trying to put forth good policy for the American people, and especially for my district. And where helping my district and my state is sometimes opposed by leadership, myself, Representative Hinson, Representative Feenstra, and Representative Nunn have shown that we're willing to go up to our party's leadership and hold for our state and our districts.
Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks, thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you.